Well, praise the Lord. It certainly is great to be here. Great to be with you. I look forward to meeting and chatting with as many of you as possible over the next few hours. And what a delight to be back here at this most blessed place where all of those 10 things we just heard are so true. And it's been a while since I've been here, but over the years have had the occasion to make many visits, many television tapings with Jerry Conacher, and so many prayer events and speaking engagements. And I've been looking forward to seeing all of you and your families today. I look forward later to the talk that I will give to our youth. Well, I don't have to tell you that building a culture of life and fighting back the evils of the culture of death are the number one moral priority for the church in our day, the number one moral tragedy we have, the ongoing holocaust of human life in the form of abortion. And I've been asked to share some reflections today about how families are to defend life, how families can defend life, especially what we have to do in the current climate in our country, in our world. There are so many different things the church says, as you well know, about the role of the family in the church and in society. And everything that the church says about the role of the family pertains to the family's role in building a culture of life. I just want to highlight a few of these things and bring them into practical application, giving you tools, resources, ideas that you can carry out in your day-to-day family life. Let's start, first of all, with this simple assertion. The first thing that families have to do in the defense of life is to make sure that they're protecting their own members, that the family itself is a safety net against the intrusion of the culture of death right into that family. You know, when we think about families as a safety net, families defending first and foremost their own members, one of the first things that comes to my mind is on the other end of the life spectrum and the battle about euthanasia. And that is the case of Terri Schiavo, which all of us followed with such intensity and such prayer. As you know, as you may have heard me say in other talks, when I was in her room, most particularly that night before she died, I was there with her brother and her sister, praying all through the night. The most palpable, the most obvious thing that was going on there was that we felt the prayers, the love, the concern of everyone, yourselves included, who throughout the nation and around the world were focused in with spiritual energy and prayer, love, and concern for Terri at that very moment. And we told her that. You were there in that room, and we felt that spiritual power of the communion of saints. Now, as you may also know, just a few days ago, I celebrated the funeral liturgy for Terri's father. Robert Schindler Sr. Died just very recently, and we had the burial last week in the Philadelphia area. And he together with his wife, Mary, and their other two children, Bobby and Suzanne, are a stunning example of how the family is called to rally around its own members, first and foremost. They're a stunning example of a Catholic family living their faith day after day, not seeking the spotlight, not trying to get onto the stage of any kind of national controversy, but ending up being thrust there only because they were loving each other. Only because they were doing what all of us try to do each day, to be Christ to one another, to start by protecting and serving one another, And the whole battle over Terry's life lasted as long as it did and got so much attention as it did, primarily because they were faithful in carrying out that love and that protection. Of course, ultimately, Terry was killed. But the love of the family was not a failure. They remain an example to every family of what I'm talking about right here, that obligation number one, task number one. We form the safety net around our own family against the culture of death. Now, this is more and more necessary in the case of when we are afflicted with any kind of disability or disease or simply the burdens of old age. Brothers and sisters, the danger in our culture today is not that we are going to end up with all kinds of treatments, interventions, and machines attached to us that we don't want. That's not the danger at all. The danger is very much the opposite, that we're going to be deprived of the basic fundamental care that we do want. That's where one of the most practical things we can do in providing a safety net within our own family against the culture of death is to prepare a document which is called the will to live. Now, we've all heard about living wills. These are documents that many people sign in order to predetermine the kinds of treatments that they do or don't want. Well, one of the problematic things about these documents, and they come in all different sizes, shapes, and varieties, but one of the problematic things is simply this: you can't predict the future. I cannot say today what kind of treatment I do or I do not want tomorrow, next year, 5 or 10 years from now, simply because I don't know what treatments will be available and I don't know what medical needs I'll have. There's no way to predict either one of those things. So we can't possibly make a logical or moral treatment decision today for circumstances that we know nothing about. What can we do? What we can do, first of all, is make known our moral convictions that whatever circumstances arise in the future, in regard to our medical needs or in regard to the treatments that may be available, we want the decisions that are made to be consistent with our Catholic faith, and our moral convictions, and the laws of God. Now, there are ways to make that clear today. There are ways to make that clear right now. And the Will to Live document, which is actually a series of 50 documents that are drawn up for one of the 50 states, according to the laws that are in effect in each of the 50 states right now, that's what the document begins by saying, that we want any medical decisions pertaining to us to be made according to our moral and religious convictions. That's number one. Number two, if in fact we are able to speak for ourselves when that need arises to make those medical decisions, well then we're going to want to consult at that point with not only the medical experts, but also with our spiritual advisor, with our priest, with somebody we trust, to evaluate what the best thing is to do. Because it always requires an evaluation of what exactly are the benefits or the risks of this particular procedure or medication or operation that may or may not help me in this situation. So we always want to consult and get the input. Doctor does not have the last word. Doctor does not have the last word. The doctor speaks with the authority of the medical profession. The clergy speak with the authority of the moral and spiritual dimension of this, and you speak with the authority of being the patient. All three have something to say. We can make it clear ahead of time, furthermore, that if we can't speak for ourselves in the midst of those circumstances, we're going to designate somebody else who will speak for us. And it's perfectly legitimate, according to all our Catholic teachings, perfectly legitimate to designate someone like that ahead of time. we have to make sure it's somebody that we know well, and they know us well, and they know our thinking well about these very issues. And therefore, it requires some serious conversations with the individual that you might appoint. And when you're comfortable that you found that individual, you appoint them. And on this document called the Will to Live, that person's name is then indicated. I'm saying all this because, once again, the first thing families need to do in building a culture of life is to defend themselves against the culture of death. This is one way to do it against one of the attacks of the culture of death, because, again, and we can't tire of repeating it, in this culture, so many people fear that the problem is going to be that they are going to be burdened by all kinds of treatments they don't want. The danger is the opposite, that we'll be denied the most basic care that we do want. Brothers and sisters, the church does not say that we need to use every medication, operation, intervention to keep our physical life going as long as possible. That's not the teaching of the church. The church says we have to take every reasonable measure, and what is reasonable, again, depends on what the circumstances are. So it's really something that has to be evaluated in the midst of the situation that we find ourselves in. If a particular treatment is going to provide some benefit to us and does not have an unbearable burden as a result, then it's morally obligatory. Food, water, always morally obligatory. But is there such a thing as a worthless treatment? Is there such an occasion as a treatment that is either not going to provide any reasonable hope of benefit, or is just going to keep us in a precarious situation where obviously our physical life is coming to its end? Of course there's such things as worthless treatments, or that might provide a burden that is unreasonable. Suppose somebody had an ailment and the doctor said, well, there's really nothing we can do except to keep you comfortable with this. However, there is over in Europe a specialized treatment for this particular ailment. You would have to go there every 5 months, and it would be $50,000 each time to get this particular intervention. And if you do that, you can probably extend your life for several years. Now, would somebody be morally obliged to do that? No, they would not be morally obliged to do that, because for most people anyway, that would be a burden that would be unreasonable. Burdens can be unreasonable in other ways too, and a lot of times it may be very subjective as far as how much burden a person can bear. But the point is that this document can be extremely helpful, and we at Priests for Life make this document available, as does National Right to Life. You can certainly contact us, and we will send you whatever documents pertain to whatever states you need them for. And as I'll mention later, we have a table of literature over at the bookstore. I'll be going there after my talk, and you can get all our contact information if you're not in contact with us already, and can ask for that document. That's one thing. We just had, as I said, the funeral for Mr. Schindler, and the Schindler family has been, ever since Terry died, and if we're coming up in March on the 5th anniversary, we're going to have a lot of special observances of that around the country. March 31st of 2010 is the 5th anniversary of her death, so be watching for announcements about special things to be done on that day. But the family has been reaching out to other families, and this is the beautiful thing. They haven't been absorbed by despair. They haven't been absorbed by anger and bitterness. No, they have seen this as an opportunity for mission, for service. And isn't that the perfect Catholic way of responding to tragedy and suffering? They see it as an opportunity not to turn in on themselves and to get all collapsed in their grief, but rather to stand up in the power of the risen Christ, to go forth and to serve other families who may be facing and are facing the same kind of challenges that they did. And so the Terry Chivo Foundation is doing that, and they're creating this network of clergy and attorneys and medical people and just anyone interested in assisting, and they reach out to other families to give them guidance and advice. The safety net that the family has to be against the culture of death is also, of course, in regard to the ongoing tragedy of abortion. We just started, week before last, a new series of episodes on our EWTN Defending Life program. And one of the upcoming episodes, you're going to see a young lady by the name of Kathleen who tells the story of herself getting pregnant while away at college and how she dealt with that unexpected, unplanned pregnancy. She dealt with it by choosing life, but one of the aspects of the story that we delve into in our Defending Life episode is this: the role of her family, her siblings, first of all, and then her parents, in getting her through that situation, in giving her the courage to say yes to life. The courage that she had to say yes to life, of course, was instilled in her by her parents from her earliest years. So the education, the witness, the conversation, the prayers in the family unit about the dignity of life permeated her mind and heart and soul. She knew. In fact, when she got to the point when she told her parents about the pregnancy, and I'll say a little more detail about how that happened in a moment, she said to her dad, he, God, knew him before he was born. What a marvelous thing to say in the midst of the confusion, the distress, the tears of first trying to deal with news like this. She right away expressed back to her parents a truth which, without doubt, they had instilled in her decades before. Her understanding that there's more going on here than just the immediate problem. There's a plan that's in place here. God knew this child from the beginning of the world. His choice always comes before ours. What an arrogance it is in the human heart that sometimes arises to think that our choice is more important than God's. And she had this awareness. Now, how did she come to tell her parents? When she first found out what had happened, she called her brother. And her brother drove from home out to the school where she was in residence and brought her back home. Supported her, made her realize right away she had a family which was going to be a safety net in this situation. Then she spoke to her sister. And when it came time to tell her parents that weekend, she just felt the greatest anxiety, and she said to her sister, how am I going to do this? I don't know how to say this to them. And her sister said, just think of this for a moment. Once you tell them a few minutes from now, you're never going to have to feel this way again. You tell them, and this whole world of support is going to open up to you and to your child. That's what happened. That's what she did. And her parents were so supportive as well. Here's where we find the challenge, brothers and sisters, because we try to pass along within the family to our children and grandchildren, nieces and nephews, the Catholic vision, which is God's vision of human sexuality. We attempt to pass along by word and example, and by opening up to our children the treasure chest of the church's teachings on the human body and life. We try to impart to them the vision that human sexuality has a context. It's life-giving, it's love-giving, its context is marriage, when two people come together in that physical union of intimacy open to life. And this is beautiful because this is a reflection of God himself sharing his creative power with us. In trying to convey this truth, we're conveying the whole picture. The yes to chastity, to purity, is a yes to life at the same time. In practice, the challenge we face, that many families face, is this: that the two messages end up being in competition with one another. Namely, the call to sexual integrity, sexual purity, and the call to openness to life, and the absolute prohibition on ever taking life for whatever reason at all. The way that they're can be in tension with one another is that the no to the activity that can lead one of our children to become pregnant is conveyed so strongly that if it happens, they're afraid to approach us for the help that we're ready to give them to get through that pregnancy. And this is the sad thing. You know, somebody was telling me recently of what happened in their daughter's Catholic high school, where one of the students got pregnant and decided to bring that child to birth, and was told by the school she couldn't come up on stage to graduate. Couldn't be part of the ceremony. And one of her classmates had also become pregnant and had that child slaughtered by abortion, and she was up there on stage graduating. Now, something is wrong with this picture. Something is very wrong, because here we have a Catholic institution which, without saying so, is in effect encouraging abortion over childbirth. We have to be so wise here. It can happen in a Catholic institution, it can happen in a family. The family has to be the sanctuary of life. That's one of the very definitions that the church gives to the families. The sanctuary of life. It's a communion of love. It's a school of prayer. It's the domestic church. And the yes is said with equal force to sexual purity and to life. That somehow we have to convey the gospel of mercy and the gospel of life, one and the same gospel. The gospel that shows us that vision of what is right and what is wrong is the gospel of welcome and support when we have done wrong, without in any way condoning it. There's the delicate balance. There's the challenge. We're here for you when things go wrong. That's not the same thing as we're giving you permission to do what's wrong. Of course, we deal with this when we talk about confession of sins in general, right? People think that confession is always available, which of course it is. We can go as many times as we want, which of course we can. God will always forgive us if we repent, which of course he will. So that leads sometimes to an experience I had early on in hearing confessions as a priest. Somebody came to me and said, "Father, can I confess a sin before I commit it?" And of course I said, "No, you can't. Because if you know you're going to commit it and you intend to commit it, you're obviously not sorry for it. You can't confess if you're not sorry for it, because I can give you absolution only for what you're sorry for." Mercy is not permission. But neither is prohibition a denial of mercy. And in the family, we have to communicate both of those truths. And probably the best way to communicate them is just to come right out and say exactly what I'm saying here. Let's have the conversations. Let's make it clear what we're saying. And not allow our children, grandchildren, nieces, or nephews to have the wrong impression. Brothers and sisters, this is point number one, the family as the safety net. Now, there's one other dynamic going on here, especially in our culture, where now we have our children growing up in a country where abortion has been legal throughout all nine months of pregnancy for almost 4 full decades. Now, did you ever ask the question, while we know what abortion does to the baby who's aborted, and we have to constantly look at that, look the evil in the face, constantly face up to it more and more and more. We know what abortion does to the baby who's aborted. But what does it do to the children who survive? What does it do to our children growing up in a culture of abortion? Does it have an impact on them? Does the fact that abortion is legal have an impact on the children who are born? And the answer is it has a tremendous impact. Imagine this. What is it like to a child to realize at a certain point in time that abortion means killing of the baby inside the mommy? I used to be a baby inside my mommy. When it was legal to kill me. I could have been, according to the law, I could have been aborted. That must be a monumental, earth-shaking moment of insight. And I imagine most children come to that point where they connect those dots at a time when they're probably alone, probably nobody knows what their thoughts are at that moment, or their feelings. And they may not tell anybody for a very long time. But what impact does that have on them? Psychologists and psychiatrists are beginning to study this phenomenon. And it's called abortion survivor syndrome. The impact of understanding that no matter what kind of loving family you have, no matter how committed to life your parents are, nevertheless, you were considered a non-person under the law. You were born because you were wanted. You were born because a decision was made to grant you birth. And that might sound like, that might sound pretty good. It's nice to be wanted. In fact, Planned Parenthood says every child a wanted child. But it's not as good as it sounds when you think about it. Because if I'm alive because I was wanted, then does that mean if I was not wanted, I don't deserve to be alive? If I'm here because someone chose that I should be here, what happens to me if they don't choose? And what happens if they stop choosing tomorrow? If I'm alive because I was wanted, what if my parents stop wanting me? Then what happens to me? In other words, where's the foundation for my protection? What's the source of my value? Somebody else? Or is it a value that's in me already because it comes from God? Now, friends, it's either one or the other. Either our ultimate value, either the foundation for why we have to be protected and respected, is in us already because we're human, and it was, of course, of God that made us so, or it's given to us from the outside, whether you want to say it's the choice of the parent or of the doctor or of the government or whatever external source it might be. The courts, because the courts say that it's right or wrong to kill me, that's why I can or cannot be killed. Why are we protected? What's the basis for the protection that the law gives to you and me? Just because some people sitting in courtrooms decided to give it to us? Of course not. We know where it comes from. We have our dignity because we're human. God himself gives us our right. Even our Declaration of Independence recognizes that, and that's not a sectarian document. But it says we're endowed by our Creator with the inalienable right to life, and the governments exist to secure that right, not to give it, to secure it, to protect it, to preserve it. And that's exactly what we stopped doing when Roe v. Wade was decided. What I'm saying is this. Within the family, we have a big job to do to counteract the idea that our children are valuable because they're wanted. It's not because they're wanted. It's because they're welcomed. And those are two very different things. Planned Parenthood says every child a wanted child. And then, of course, their implication is if the child is unwanted, you can have the child killed. Our message within the church, our message within the pro-life movement, our message right here among us is that every child is to be a welcomed child. And the difference is this: when you're wanted, you're meeting somebody else's needs, expectations, and desires. When you're welcomed, you have a place here whether anybody else recognizes it or not. You have a place here whether anybody else wants you or not. You have a place here whether anyone planned for you or foresaw you or feels ready for you. It doesn't matter. You have a place here. You are welcomed because you have a dignity inside of you that we didn't put there, we can't put it there, and we can't take it away. You're welcomed. And it's when we think along those lines of welcome and apply it not only to the children, but to every born child, and to the poor, and to the sick, and to those living in war-torn parts of the world, and to every human being, then we have a culture of life and a civilization of love. Then the world is transformed. On that powerful truth, we started in the family by talking about welcome, by living welcome, by letting our children understand, it doesn't come from me, it doesn't come from the government, it doesn't come from anybody. You have a place here because you are who you are. Nobody can take that away from you. God himself has decreed that you are to be here. Well, let me go on to a second way that families are to build a culture of life, because we know the church teaches us the family is a sanctuary of prayer. It's the first school of prayer. It's the place where our children are to learn how to pray first and foremost, not primarily from their religious education teacher or even at Mass or anywhere else. It's from the parents, it's from the siblings, it's from within the unit of the family that we learn how to pray. And to build a culture of life, prayer itself, first of all, inculcates that. It's interesting that when you study the attitudes of the American people on abortion, you know what one of the most consistent indicators is about whether or not a person is going to identify himself or herself as pro-life? It's the regularity of their Sunday worship. Not so much the denomination they worship in, but the fact that they do so regularly. And that's because the attitude of prayer and worship is exactly the opposite of the attitude of pro-choice. The attitude of pro-choice says, well, it's my choice, my decision that matters most. The attitude of prayer and worship is, I find my freedom when I lay down all my choices and all my life and all my activities before the Lord. God is in the center in the attitude of prayer and worship. So as soon as we're praying in the family, as soon as we're acknowledging that God is there at every moment, that we have to worship and acknowledge him and put him first, we are by that very fact inculcating the basis of the pro-life position. And then in our prayers, to pray explicitly with our families every day for an end to abortion. Because this then fosters not only our awareness that this is the number one moral problem of our day, but it also fosters the awareness that we have some responsibility regarding it, even if it's nowhere near us in terms of anything that we would ever get involved in. You notice the distinction I'm making here. Most people in the pews in our churches across the country understand and acknowledge that abortion is wrong. They do. Here's the problem. It's not that they think it's a good thing. The problem is they think it's none of their business. In other words, they're saying, oh, yeah, of course I'm pro-life. I'm against abortion. I would never have one. This is what we might be saying in our own family. We'd not go near that for anything in the world. We're not going to go anywhere near that. We're not going to have anything to do with it. We would never encourage it. It would never be even on the outskirts of our mind. Well, that's step one. When God calls us to be a people of life, that's step one. Then step two is, okay, I would never do it, but what if somebody else does? Is that any of my business? Brothers and sisters, it is in the family, first and foremost, that we have to pass on to our children a message, and it's more than a message. It's an attitude. It's a behavior. It's a spirit. And that spirit says this: when somebody else is in danger or in need, it is my business, because that person in danger or in need is my brother, my sister. This is at the basis and the heart of the gospel itself. Jesus Christ came into our world, became a member of our human family. He made our need his business. He came when we were still sinners, when we were still alienated from God. He poured out his blood for us on the cross. He didn't have to. He did it because he saw we were helpless, and he made it his business to save us. Now, we're his people. We're his. And so we live like he did, like he wants us to do, like he enables us to do. We live as Christ, which means, yes, whenever anybody is in danger or need, it's our business. And we know that this is the basis for why we feed the hungry and shelter the homeless, visit the sick and the imprisoned. Does the commandment tell us to visit only the sick and imprisoned, or help only the poor and the homeless that we're related to? Does it tell us to help only those whose names we know and whose faces we have seen? Or does it tell us to help everyone we are able to reach? The command, the imperative of love, doesn't have a condition on it. It says, this is your neighbor. This is your brother. This is your sister. It doesn't matter if you know them already or not, or if you're related to them or not. It's universal. It's Catholic. And so, brothers and sisters, we acknowledge that what pertains to the poor and the sick and the imprisoned, it pertains to the child in the womb. It's not just somebody else's choice, somebody else's child, somebody else's problem. That's our brother, our sister. We convey this to our children in the family in the way we pray every day for those children. You may be aware that we at Priests for Life have had for some time now, but we're going to kick it into higher gear because we believe now we're in a moment of greater intensity in this battle, a prayer campaign against abortion. And this I want to recommend to you as an individual and family practice, just like I recommend to pastors to make it a parish practice. We've written a simple daily prayer to end abortion, which doesn't simply say, Lord, please bring an end to this problem, but which says, Lord, I recognize that you're giving me a role in this problem, a way to solve it, and I commit myself to be active and vocal in every way I can in the pro-life effort. And that prayer can be found on a simple website that we have set up called prayercampaign.org. The prayercampaign.org website has that daily prayer to end abortion, which the family can say together. And again, if you can get people saying it every day, then you've got them thinking about the issue every day. And if we're thinking about it every day, number one, we know it's important, and number two, it's going to lead us to be doing some constructive things about the problem. I know pastors who have it said every day in their parish after Mass, and it's wonderful. And it says right in the prayer, not only that this is the biggest problem we have in society, but it also expresses the confidence that we need to have. The confidence in the resurrection of Christ that the victory over death has been won. A lot of people say to me, Father Frank, you're talking about abortion every single day. Doesn't get you depressed? I say, well, it would, except that I'm proclaiming the victory of life. And so are we all. And this is what we're saying to our families and within the family. As we pray with that joy of spirit. We pray knowing that he is risen, Christ among us. This is the way that we can face and deal with these issues day by day without growing weary. So the daily prayer campaign, here's the other thing about this website, prayercampaign.org, we also have prayers that correspond to different times of the season, of the liturgical year, the seasons, the feasts, and novenas for special feast days. So, for example, we just had the feast of Blessed Mother Teresa, right, September 5th, we had a novena leading up to that feast. And the prayer was specifically a pro-life prayer and honoring Mother Teresa, especially for her own commitment to the unborn. We have a Pentecost novena as we come to the Feast of Pentecost each year. We have Lent special prayers during the Lenten season, during the Easter season, during Advent, other saints and feasts during the year. So in other words, at this one site, you can have a family prayer nourished by the liturgical flow of the year in union with the church and specifically through the lens of our concern regarding abortion. Right now, because of our nation's battle over health care reform, the prayer that we have on this prayer website is a prayer for our nation's health care reform, that God will guide this process, fill our elected officials as well as our citizens with wisdom, courage, to think this through, to debate it, to decide the right thing, and also that the reform of health care will be accompanied by the reform of our minds and hearts in the light of the gospel of life. That's the only way it'll be done the right way. By the way, in regard to this whole health care reform debate, one of the important questions we need to ask, and you know that one of the key concerns of the church is that any kind of reform runs the danger of expanding abortion unless the legislation explicitly prohibits that. And that's simply that's one of the things we're asking the Congress to do. Say explicitly that this does not fund or include abortion. And it's amazing to me the people on the other side of this argument, on this particular point of it, who stand up and say, oh, no, it will not include expansion of abortion, including our president who says this. Oh, no, it will not exclude that. Well, then, if you're saying to us it won't exclude it, then let the bill say so. I mean, that's really not an unreasonable request. If you're saying it's already the case, well, then say that it did. Let the legislation say so, and you put an end to the debate. The fact that they're not willing to do that indicates that our concern has a real basis. But also in regard to this, people who think that abortion should be a part of health care, ask them this question: what disease does abortion cure? You ever ask anybody that question? I mean, how is anything an aspect of health care if it's not improving your health? It's either treating a disease or it's providing some medical benefit. Do you know that it's true to say that there is no proven medical benefit to the abortion procedure? I mean, can you imagine a pharmaceutical company coming up with some new drug? And, nowadays, doctors must go crazy. I'm sure we have some doctors in the audience here today. I can't imagine what it must be like that your patients come into you nowadays and they say, hey, I saw this commercial for this particular drug, it sounds pretty good to me. You're the ones that's supposed to be figuring out what kind of medication they need. And instead now we go into our doctors and, we saw this commercial about that drug and this drug. And, they have these long, complicated names that you can hardly pronounce. And now that we're going, okay, if these companies want to sell their drugs, fine. But, I'm not going to decide I want a certain drug. I don't know about you, but I'm going to let the doctor decide that. But the point is this. Suppose a company creates this kind of medicine, and they say, we're providing you with this medicine, but it really doesn't have any proven medical benefits. Isn't the first thing you ask about any kind of medication, intervention, surgery, anything at all, isn't the first question you ask, what's the benefit to this medically? Oh, abortion doesn't have any. Unless you want to say that pregnancy itself is a disease. And that's exactly what the mindset of the abortionists are and of the abortion industry. Their mindset is pregnancy itself is a disease, and that, of course, is something that none of us can subscribe to. Well, the prayer within the family. Now, I don't know how many of you use Facebook. But let me tell you something, brothers and sisters. Obviously, we know that anything on the internet, so many evil people use the internet for evil purposes. We're very much aware of that. And we have to fight against that with all our might, and the church bears witness to our responsible use of new media like internet and specifically the social networking sites like Facebook being the primary one among many. But remember our Catholic approach to the world, which is that the fact that evil people use things for evil doesn't mean that those things are evil. The fact that people use the internet, some people who are evil use it for evil things, doesn't mean it's evil in itself. And it certainly doesn't mean that we shouldn't use it for good. The Holy Father himself is using and urging people to connect with his messages and the teachings of the church as they come through the magisterium through Facebook and other internet media. If we, the people of God, don't use these tools for good, then we're just opening the door for other people to use them for evil. We've got to conquer these tools and use them to advance the kingdom of life. And that's what we can do. That's what we at Priests for Life have been doing with an intensity. And in particular, this, what I just mentioned to you about prayer, we have set up what we are calling the biggest prayer group in history on Facebook. Now, understand something about Facebook. This isn't just about, oh, I want to go tell people who I am and then I can make friends with people and we can share what we're doing. It's way more than that. There are people in your own community, in your own state. There are people all around the world who think the way we do, who would gladly come to a conference like this, who love the Lord and love the faith and love life. And we'll never meet them. And they may never come to know about us. They may never come to know about the Apostle for Family Consecration. What happens on Facebook is that you have a very powerful way for people who have similar interests to find one another. When we started this largest prayer group in history, it's a Facebook cause. And a cause on Facebook is, a profile is, well, you set up a page for yourself and you say, here's who I am, and you start to make friends, you connect with your friends. A cause is people rallying around a particular thing that needs to get done, like ending abortion. So this particular cause is called Pray to End Abortion. And we put it up there, and within a couple of weeks, we had 28,000 people already joined up on this cause. But that is without any promotion, any really vigorous promotion at all. Why? Because people are going onto Facebook, good people, believe like we do, and they're looking for other people of like mind. So it's a way of people finding each other, and then once you connect, here's the beautiful thing about it. It's more powerful than just, knowing a person's phone number or where they live. Because then if people move, if they change their phone number, even if they change their email address, once you're connected on Facebook, unless you voluntarily want to disconnect from the person, you stay connected. You can always find them. Even though all those other details may change and will change over time. It's a way that people are finding, reconnecting with people from their childhood, from their school days, from their years ago that they haven't seen or heard about. People are reconnecting through this simple tool, and we're using it so that people can connect in faith, people can connect in prayer, specifically prayer for the cause of life. Best way to find what I'm talking about right now, this prayer group on Facebook, to sign up for it, I'll give you another link. It's prolifeprayers.com. If you go to prolifeprayers.com, you end up on the Facebook cause, and then you just sign up for a Facebook account, and you're connected with all these people. And we'll put the different prayers that I just mentioned about all the seasons of the years and the feast days and so forth. We'll put them right there. So prolifeprayers.com. And again, the other link I gave you before, prayercampaign.org, will get you the same information. So the family, a sanctuary of prayer. Thirdly, the family as an educational unit, as the place where first and foremost our children learn. Many of you are homeschooling families, but whether we do homeschooling or use the services of other schools for our children, as you know, the church's teaching is clear. The primary responsibility for the education of children rests with the parents. And because that's true, the family is always supposed to be the place where the most important learning occurs and where it occurs most effectively, because you're the ones who best know your children. Well, brothers and sisters, what do we teach within the family about pro-life? When I speak to young students about abortion, very, very young students, you know how I bring up the topic? Two ways. First of all, if I'm, for example, at a children's mass, here's what I'll often do. The theme is, no matter how small you are, you're just as valuable as anyone else. A simple message, but it's a message which the culture of death rejects. I'll start a homily at a children's mass. I'll call up one of the youngest, smallest children. I'll say, you want to come up and help me start the homily? So I'll stand the child next to me. I'll say, now look at all those people out there. Are they bigger than you? And the child says, yes. Now this is totally unrehearsed. Are they stronger than you? Yes. Do they know more things than you? Yes. Now, let me ask you this. Are they more special than you? No. Now, I've done this many times in parishes all across the country, every time completely unrehearsed. I don't even know what child I'm going to call up before we do it. And they always get it right. Always. And then I thank the child, let the child sit down, and then I look at the congregation and I say, friends, the children always get it right. And sometimes we adults get it wrong. The value of somebody doesn't depend on their size. Their specialness doesn't depend on their age. And it doesn't depend on how dependent they are on us. It depends only on one thing. And it's the point we were making before. God has created these children, and He has given them their dignity. That's why we welcome them. Now, the idea that our specialness doesn't depend on our size is a critical idea to convey for a culture of life before we even talk about abortion explicitly. The other thing we convey is simply this. I'm talking now of very, very young children. Some mommies and daddies are afraid to be mommies and daddies. And we have to pray for them and encourage them. And this is something, too, that we can pass along so powerfully within the family. Finally, as you know from the things that the pro-life movement is saying every day, one of the key things we need to do to stop abortion is to be able to have right at our fingertips the resources to send somebody to for alternatives to abortion. And the phone number, and when I speak to high school students, I say to them, I'm going to give you a number to memorize because you will, not you might, but you will need to use this number to save someone's life. And it's the hotline number for pregnancy centers throughout the country. It can be called any time of the day or night, and the caller will be referred to all kinds of assistance closest to where they live for counseling, medical and financial help, legal advice, ability to make an adoption plan or to raise the child, job and education opportunities, etc. And it's 1-800-395-HELP. It's called the option line. It connects with thousands of pregnancy centers. I just spoke at the national gathering of many of these pregnancy centers the other day. 1-800-395-HELP. Have that number memorized within your family. I tell the high school students, I want you to memorize this number so well that you dream about it when you go to sleep. 1-800-395-HELP. Because you will use this number to save the life of a child, of one of your friends and one of your classmates one of these days. It will happen. You're either going to know where to send her right away or you're not. And just like in a medical emergency, every moment counts when that situation comes upon us. And finally, the involvement, the active involvement of the family in the various things that the pro-life movement does is another key way for families to build a culture of life, to participate as families. For example, in going to pray at the abortion mills. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. and his niece works on our staff, Dr. Alveda King. She works full-time with Priests for Life. She says the civil rights movement of today is the pro-life movement. Her uncle was criticized for bringing children on the civil rights marches. And they told him, this is going to traumatize these children. It's going to harm these children. And you know what he said? These children have already been harmed by segregation. We are teaching them to fight back. This is part of their healing, not their harming. And so we say the same thing when those on the other side of this issue will, in some kind of false pretend concern for our children, say to us, oh, you're harming them by putting them in the midst of this big divisive issue. Oh, no, we're not. What we say is they have already been harmed by the culture of death. They've already been harmed, as I said a few moments ago, by this notion that they're alive only because they're wanted, that they don't have an intrinsic dignity which the law has to protect. We're teaching them to fight back against that falsehood and against that evil. One of the best things we can teach them to do is to stand up against the killing of their youngest brothers and sisters in the human family. Bring them out to the prayer vigils. Bring them to the killing centers. Teach them to stand against this evil. You have no reason to be afraid that they're going to be traumatized. Friends, let me even tell you this, because I know this is a concern for many of you. Please don't be afraid that your children are somehow going to be traumatized if they see those terrifying pictures of the aborted babies. You know, one of my good friends is a child psychiatrist, Dr. Philip Ney, and he's also the man who has probably done more research on abortion than anyone in the world. And I've talked with him about this at length, as with many other psychologists, psychiatrists, and parents. And, you know, he makes a very persuasive point, which I'm sure you will understand right away. He says, look, when our children see something that's disturbing, the primary factor in whether it's going to harm them or not is not what they're seeing. It's what your reaction is as the parent. A parent who's in a car and the child is in the back seat and they drive by a anti-abortion protest and there's the gory signs and the mom starts getting all upset and says, oh, close your eyes, hide your eyes. I don't want you to see this. Well, now these children hide their eyes because mommy just told them, and mommy's obviously upset and they don't know what they didn't see. Do you know how powerful a child's imagination is? They see you upset because you didn't want them to see something, and now they're left to the mercy of their imagination about what it is that they didn't see. And furthermore, they don't want to ask you because it got you upset. They don't want to get you upset again. They don't want to get you mad at them. So they're left with a question mark and with whatever horrifying image their imagination is going to substitute for the reality. It's the response of your loving concern, of your reassurance that they're safe, that is going to help them. And we have, throughout the country, children themselves holding up some of these signs, speaking up for the people who do bad things to these babies. Friends, don't be afraid. Inculcate in your families that spirit of activism, and inculcate in your families the sense of civic responsibility as well. We know what our church teaches about this. We have got to be involved. We have got to help our children understand from the earliest possible age that we live in a government set up by the people, for the people. We govern ourselves. This is the way our founders envisioned it. This is what we have to preserve. And when we see our government passing bad laws and bad policies, we can sit back and complain only if we're also actively involved in changing it, not only by lobbying those who are in office and challenging them, but also by doing one of the most powerful things we do. Aside from coming to the altar and coming to the sacraments and coming to prayer, one of the most powerful things we do, going into the voting booth. Let's start by instilling in our own family the freedom from the fear of standing up and saying publicly, as I try to instill in the priests the freedom from the fear of saying this publicly in the pulpit, that we as the people of life must stand up in this society and say, if a politician can't respect the life of a little baby, how's he going to respect yours or mine? A public servant who can't tell the difference between serving the public and killing the public doesn't belong in public office. And we have to say it clearly, vigorously, repeatedly, not only from the pulpits, in the media, to our neighbors, everywhere, anywhere. We've got to raise up a generation who understands well what it means to be a citizen of the kingdom of heaven, and who understands just as well that being a citizen of the kingdom of heaven does not for 1 minute relieve us of our responsibility to be active citizens on earth, but rather impels us to be active citizens of our country, informed voters, and voters who are going to advance the kingdom of life in every election. Brothers and sisters, all of these and so much more are points that I commend to you with great confidence, knowing your commitment to carry them out. Please know of our commitment to work with you as Priests for Life. We are not just for priests, we're for you. Together, we will win this battle for life, for the unborn, for all the vulnerable. Let's work together. Let's pray together. Let's hasten the day of victory. God bless you.